This is Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I'm Yves Engler. Today we are discussing Pierre Poilievre's anti-Palestinian policies. In a recent interview, Poilievre said he wants to starve Palestinians, deliver more arms to Israel, and suppress opposition to its crimes. He's repeatedly blamed Iran for Palestinian resistance, for protests in Canada against the genocide, and promotes Israeli violence in the region. To discuss someone who's been labeled Canada's yapping Zionist chihuahua, we are fortunate to have journalist Samira Mohyeddin, who is the founder of On the Line Media. First of all, thanks a lot for coming on to Talking Foreign Policy. And what do you make of Poilievre's position on Palestine?
I mean, nobody should be surprised by Poilievre's position on Palestine. I wouldn't even say it's his position. I would say it's Netanyahu's position. I don't think that Poilievre really has a very original thought at all of his own when it comes to Palestine. He's really, as you described him, yapping chihuahua. And I think he just parrots whatever Netanyahu says or whatever CIJA says, the Center for Israeli Jewish affairs here in Canada. So there's nothing original about anything that Poilievre says on Palestine. I think it in a lot of ways aligns with the liberal party's view on Palestine, right? Maybe it's not as bad, but the liberals haven't come out and said let's starve them and let's bomb Iran. But in a lot of ways, I think it's very similar to the liberal view.
Yeah, there's a piece that was published by the Maple back in May, titled "Pierre Poilievre's Incoming War on Support for Palestine," and they basically traced a lot of his views, which I think, as you pointed out, it's unclear, how much he takes this seriously himself or how knowledgeable he is. But what they do in part in this piece is they trace it to Stephen Harper.
Mhm.
And Stephen Harper, of course, tilted further to the pro-Israel side after Paul Martin. And Poilievre had, while in Martin's or in Harper's government, kind of followed that line repeatedly. But there was a recent interview he gave with the Winnipeg Jewish Review. I thought there was an element of this that was kind of interesting, which was the focus of his sort of positioning was his combating wokeism. And I don't know what woke really means at this point, but what I thought was really kind of interesting in all this is that he in this interview and on posts on X, he referred to the wokeism and combating wokeism, but he actually says as part of this, he's going to, in his words, defund universities, which defund, that word, of course, somewhat associated with Black Lives Matters and police, and but that he was going to defund universities that, quote, make Jews feel unsafe and uncomfortable on their campuses. He actually said that previously. What is your sort of reaction to this? I'm going to combat wokeism by defunding universities that allow speech that makes people feel uncomfortable.
I mean, it sounds like a word salad that Trump put together. This is what we're going to hear a lot about, and we've heard it not even just in the on Parliament Hill. We've heard it in Ontario also with some of the members of the provincial parliament here. Fighting against wokeism and not and sort of categorizing these students. Particularly, I'm talking about the Palestine solidarity encampments that we saw across campuses as places where useful idiots were gathering and doing the bidding of governments like Iran and other places. And so him saying that he's going to defund universities sounds very much like Trump saying that he's going to, throw out the students that are here, international students that are here who are protesting for Palestine. Trump also said that he's going to defund universities that make Jewish students feel unsafe, whatever that means. I always think about the fact that we're now coddling people who are pro-genocide, which is pretty wild, right? What does feeling unsafe mean, even? While we're seeing Palestinian students who nobody cares about, right? Palestinian students who've lost family over in Gaza, nobody's asking how they're doing while their family members are being killed. What they're really focused on is, is that Zionist student feeling okay to walk across campus? They shouldn't see any protests happening. They shouldn't feel uncomfortable while they're supporting and shilling for Israel as it conducts a genocide. That's really the focus here on, you know, and it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. We have to be able to distinguish between people being under threat, actual threat, and someone feeling uncomfortable about ideas. And I've said this multiple times. If you feel uncomfortable with ideas, you shouldn't be at a university. You should be inside a nursery. We need to understand the place of universities in all of this. They are supposed to be bastions of freedom, bastions of free thought, a place where people can express themselves, express ideas. But really, what we're seeing is a clampdown. And this is not new. I mean, we saw this during apartheid South Africa, right? Particularly with the University of Toronto, who went kicking and screaming towards defunding and pulling and having nothing to do with apartheid South Africa, something that the students had called for a decade before the University of Toronto actually did sort of cut relations with universities in South Africa and the apartheid government. So it's not new. We're going to hear a lot of this, and I'm afraid that Pierre Poilievre may very well be our next prime minister. It's looking that way. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope there is some sort of miraculous awakening by people in Canada to understand what this man will bring to this country. But it looks more and more like this could be our prime minister. So buckle up, everybody. It's
Yeah,
going to be
well,
bumpy. Yeah.
it's gonna be when we talk about feelings. It was only about 2 weeks ago. There was twins, Palestinians who were set to go to University of Waterloo, PhD, and they were just wiped out by Israel. So we talk about people being concerned about a placard. They might not like the idea. It's pretty wild to focus on that in the context of people being incinerated, babies being dying of hypothermia, hospitals being burnt down as we're seeing in recent days. But that is kind of where the Canadian political and media is focused. So, one of the things Polyev has focused on, you mentioned a bit, is this sort of business of blaming Iran for protests, encampments, blaming Iran for Palestinian resistance. There was actually a whole report that came out back in the summer that claimed all this association with Iran based upon social media. The encampments were an Iranian thing because there were lots of social media accounts in Iran that posted about the McGill encampment. I don't really know the connection there, but that was shared by Polyev and promoted in certain circles. But he's also beyond that. He's also basically cheerleading Israel attacking Iran. And about a week ago, Trita Parsi, who is at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft down in Washington, D.C., is a well-known Iranian American commentator, scholar. He posted a video of Polyev calling for Israel to bomb Iran. Polyev said it would be, quote, a gift by the Jewish state to humanity.
To humanity. That's right. Yeah. I watched that press conference. And, again, I wasn't surprised. Pierre Poilievre has, and I'll say this as someone who is in the Iranian community, I'm an Iranian Canadian. Pierre Poilievre has made attacking Iran um, his way of coming into our community, garnering votes and favor within our community here in Canada. And his deputy minister Melissa Lanceman has done the exact same thing. Their viewpoint on Iran is that, Iran needs to be annihilated, basically. And so they've gone very hard on the Iranian government to curry favor with the community in diaspora. It works on some people and it doesn't work on others. But for a Canadian member of parliament, official opposition, to sit and say that anybody should bomb anybody and it would be a gift to humanity is really disgusting. You know, not considering, of course, the 90 million Iranians, how would that affect them inside the country? The only focus is on Israel, right? And I think that Pierre Poilievre would give Israel carte blanche to do what it likes with Iran. And the hell with the Iranians, the hell with the country, and the hell with the circumstances. He would absolutely do that. It's a scary time right now. I don't think people really get it. I don't think people really understand the real dangers in having this man become our prime minister.
Yeah, no, it's scary to imagine that kind of cheerleading for warfare, any warfare really for that matter. But
But I sorry to interrupt you. I do want to come back because you brought this up, and I do want to come back to it. The encampments and blaming Iran for Palestinian solidarity. This is something that really pissed me off, if I could say it very colloquially, because I was inside that encampment at University of Toronto. I covered it for the 63 days that it was there. There was no Iranian money being funneled there. Iran had nothing to do with that encampment. And it's ridiculous that I even have to say this. And, the characters of Warren Kinsella and, Kevin Vaughn, who's sits as an independent member of parliament, um, came on Twitter and uh, said, where do these tents come from? These tents are so expensive. And, it was like, Kevin, tell me you've never been camping before. You can buy a tent for $23 at Walmart. And he was like, why are these tents all the same? So there was all of this ridiculous rhetoric coming out. And, of course, the Toronto Sun prints whatever Kinsella writes. And Kinsella was really the one behind promulgating this ridiculous idea that Iran was behind this. But what's interesting is that, Iran uses this to their advantage, right? Iran sort of positions itself as being the only country that, really focuses on Palestine and Palestinians. Resistance inside Gaza is all um, the work of Palestinians. It has nothing to do with Iran. Okay, Iran is not funneling money to Palestinians inside Gaza. Iran has never built a hospital inside Gaza. This is all just a creation that I think is happening because it's very obvious that something is going on, right? We've already seen Israel bomb Iran multiple times over the past year and a half. They killed Hania inside Tehran. And even before that, Iran has had a nuclear scientist killed. So Israel has a presence inside Iran and has been conducting what amount to, under international law, terrorist bombings. Israel is doing terrorist activities inside the country. So it's now creating this other sort of, Iran had everything to do with October 7th. Iran was the mastermind behind it. You'll hear a lot of these pro-Israel analysts say, the head of the octopus is in Tehran. Tehran's tentacles are everywhere. And they're garnering to do something. It's very obvious. What that something is, I don't know, right? We could see a strike on Iran's nuclear sites. We could see a strike on IRGC bases. I'm not sure what Israel is up to, but it has the full backing of Poilievre. That's for sure.
yeah, and we've got to remember that the Harper government back in 2012 cut off diplomatic relations with Iran, and listed it as a state sponsor of terror, I believe.
Yeah, and recently the Liberals um, also listed the IRGC as a state sponsor of terror, which is something I should say that the Iranian community had been really asking for here for a long time, particularly after the plane was shot down. That was sort of a turning point for the Iranian community here. But what's actually happened, because very much like the IDF, the Iranian men inside the country are conscripted. They have to serve. And so you're having all of these young men right now who had to serve inside the army, and you don't get to choose whether you go into the sort of the National Army or the IRGC. They're now being brought into this massive net, right? And not being allowed to go over into the US, not being allowed to come here as students. So it's gotten really messy, this whole uh, prescribing of the IRGC as a terrorist entity. And to be honest, it really has no effect whatsoever. Not at all. It's really just for show.
Yeah, I think it creates this Iran is the demon kind of disposition. One thing, just maybe going towards a conclusion, kind of with you on a personal level, because you mentioned covering the University of Toronto encampment. And I know you've been, following both the anti-genocide protests in Toronto and also I shouldn't say following, well, following and covering the sort of pro-genocide protests or sort of movements in Toronto. Kind of what's been your trajectory over the past 15 months as a journalist in terms of sort of covering this horror that we're seeing play out in Gaza, but also, across the region and in Toronto.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. At times, it feels like a bit of a zoo, where you have sort of these two warring sides, and the police in between. The police only brutalizing the one side, right? The police tactics in Toronto have been very brutal during pro-Palestinian protests here, and so it feels like the police here uh, are trying to find ways to stifle protest. Recently, they put a call out to the community to say, what is it that's, you would like to see police do more, etc. But when it comes to the encampment, you know, again, I come back to what you were talking about, students feeling uncomfortable. When you were inside that encampment, there was nothing uncomfortable about it. It was the communities that would come on the outside, and threaten the students, assault the students. I've seen it. Call them rapists, terrorists. These were the people, most of them pensioners, who were, coming in from the suburbs to downtown Toronto at the University of Toronto. And I say pensioners because that's exactly what it was. The average age group was, over 60. These were not students at the University of Toronto who were coming out against the other students who were protesting. These were people who were bussed in from the suburbs, and they're the same people who you would find, like protesting against the pro-Palestine groups elsewhere, and they were being just ridiculous. I mean, the to watch pensioners behaving in such a manner, at times it was really absurd and funny because they don't have anything to say other than rapists, pro-terrorists, Hamas supporters, useful idiots. I mean, some of the things they were leveling at these students who really have, I mean, let's be very clear, these students have international humanitarian law behind them. What do these pensioners have? Not much. They don't have much. And so they like to categorize themselves as being pro-peace and progressive. But I can tell you, when I went to cover these protests, I was gay bashed, which I had never been at any pro-Palestine protest that I was covering. And these people are supposed to be the progressives, the ones who tell people like me, if you were in Gaza, they'd throw you off the rooftops, right? Meanwhile, we've seen IDF throw Palestinians off rooftops during the past 15 months. So it's just a big joke, really. And you have to, at the same time, I mean, the thing is, even I'll be quite personal with you here, is that I went to the University of Toronto. I was in that cohort in 2005, 2006, where, Norman Finkelstein had come to the university to speak. We had brought Robert Fisk to come and speak during Israeli Apartheid Week. And so I'm seeing a revivification of a movement that started a long time ago. The roots of the Palestine solidarity movement, and maybe it wasn't an encampment, but the students asking for divestment and sanctions is very old, and these universities really need to catch up to where their students are, because the students have been very clear to me when I was covering this. They're not going back. There is no going back from this. And the sooner universities realize this, the better off they'll be.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the trajectory. I think that's what we see on campuses is that this is uh, what we've seen is the culmination of decades and decades of work by people like you. I was involved in campus activism. There was SPHR back at Concordia in the late 1990s. And then, 25 years later, that culmination of all the activism. And when you look at votes on these university campuses at McGill, it's striking. I mean, the overwhelming majority of students call for divestment, overwhelming, and that's a shift, and even a shift in the past 10 years in terms of the votes. So it really is a grassroots people power movement challenging this apartheid and genocide. Um, Thanks a lot for coming on talking
Sure.
foreign policy. People can check you out. You're very active on X, on Twitter, on the Line Media. Thanks a lot for coming on, Samira.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.